Hi, I'm Tim Carter from Tim Carter TV, and I want to show you a pretty good example of a breakout session of the Delphi technique. This was part of a meeting held on July 31st, 2012 in Laconia, New Hampshire. The overall meeting was about poverty, and it was facilitated or organized by the United Way in Laconia, New Hampshire. However, the mechanics of the session of the meeting was facilitated by New Hampshire Listens, which is the center of the vortex of the Delphi technique. Here in New Hampshire, they are part of the Carsey Institute, which is under the umbrella of the University of New Hampshire. What you're going to see in the next hour is the second part of the overall meeting. These Delphi technique meetings are typically broken into three parts. Everyone gathers at first into a large room. You typically sit down at tables, not always, and you then are assigned a number by counting off at your group. That's what we did. And then the people who have the same number are broken out into smaller groups that go into small classrooms to have the discussion. And then at the end of those discussions, you're taken back into a bigger room where you hear the summary points produced by each of the facilitators. Our facilitator was a woman named Denise Sleeper. She's a professional. She was trained by the people at New Hampshire Listens, and she did a pretty good job. She didn't bully anybody. That sometimes happens in these secondary groups. And you'll see all that in the upcoming video. We're going to be taping a lot more of these listening sessions upcoming here in New Hampshire, and I think you're going to enjoy them. They're classic Delphi. We'll catch all of the information in the future videos. You'll see all three parts of the meetings. Very, very important stuff. Be very careful when you hear listening sessions, circles, and all the other the terms that are used in the Delphi technique. It's a very, very tricky psychological environment, and you have to be very, very careful. Do your research. Make sure you go online and read many, many articles about the Delphi technique. I'm Tim Carter for Tim Carter TV, and you will see something very fascinating in the rest of this video.
Is there anything else you'd like to see up on here as ground rules? You look like a very respectful crowd. You're looking like maybe you're thinking there might be something else.
Well, I mentioned this amendment earlier today, and good, Bob just came back in. Bob and I attended a meeting on Friday, a legislative breakfast meeting, that was purportedly to deal with the same subject that we're dealing with here, this issue of reduction of poverty in Belknap County. And we spent probably, I left early, so I don't know how long it went on after I left.
9:30.
Well, then I didn't miss much. The very disappointing thing was, and Bob would happen to be the one who pointed out, I think, first, but I was thinking the same thing. And that is, most of the meeting took dealing with the symptoms, the outcomes of poverty. And we talked a lot about legislation, and we talked a lot about various programs in the Lakes region that deal with, people who are in poverty and trying to help them and somehow deal with that. But we never dealt with really the issues of reducing poverty. And so when I look at that, I think, and I thought about this when I walked in tonight, let's start out by talking about, well, you're going to start out by talking about what's poverty and how it exists in Belknap County. But hopefully we're going to get around to talking about, and we're not going to talk about helping people pay their rent, and all of that is fine. And my introduction, I work for organizations that are involved in doing that. But I don't reduce poverty. When I help somebody with rent, I don't reduce poverty. I help them survive in poverty. And that's not what I think this is supposed to be about, if I understand the focus of this group.
That is correct. And so what I'm going to ask, since you had the chance to review the information, and you are a pretty savvy group in the topic of poverty, do we need to review the information, or was there any piece of information that surprised you? Or can we just jump into the discussion, as Bill said? Because what I want to do is make sure we give everybody a fair chance to understand the information before we move forward. But if folks in this room really feel like they have a good handle on what's in here, we can bypass and go straight to conversation.
The only one that I might like to just revisit is
Yep.
on page 8, and it's the survey that says expected community benefits from reducing poverty.
Yes.
And just, I just was, I don't quite understand how one affects the other. As far as lowering property taxes, reducing poverty, how would that lower property taxes?
Now, I think what you have to remember is this is the
A
results of people in your community
What
who've
their
taken the survey.
perceptions are.
Yes, exactly. So these are the perceptions of your community members that
Okay.
if you reduce poverty, that these are the things that they feel would change if poverty was reduced. And that, that might be,
Okay.
these items alone might be a really good discussion point, but that's really the perceptions of people in the community.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the places where we can differentiate between what we're surveying, like when you see survey at the top, those were from the community, but when you actually see actual living wage and typical living wage, these come from research-based information. I believe, what they say, from Harvard, and there were 2 universities that actually have calculators, so it's not made-up numbers and they're not surveys of our own community. It is nationally based research. So at least you can understand that that information comes from the global view of poverty in our nation.
The only 2 comments I had, you asked if there was something that surprises me. And after all these years in working in social services, the actual poverty income levels still surprise me, because sometimes I see the numbers and I think we're so out of touch with what it actually takes to run any type of household. I mean, I think that's a travesty that we're still, that a family would be living on $19,000 a year, which would barely house somebody, never mind raise children. And the other thing is, I don't know what your impression is, but I think this chart of typical wages in Belknap County seems incredibly skewed to the people that I'm working with, certainly, and not at all what I would consider poverty-based wages. These are $20 and $30 an hour, but I don't see how that
it doesn't happen.
And this information comes from the New Hampshire Employment Security. They actually have a place where you can pull out those charts. But I think there's also a lot of under-the-table employment in Belknap County that would show much lower wages. I think particularly in tourism as well. It may not be under the table, but tourism tends to be really low wages. I think 2 of the areas that were highlighted in here, information had to do with retail work, because that's a growing area for employment in this region, but also has the lowest wages, and food service, which again, it's a growing employment area, but again, it has some of the lowest paying jobs. And so that, when we look at what the living wages, and you look at those 2 really, high growing occupations, it's hard to understand how families can survive.
In that same line of thought, I think it's one of the last of the charts in here. It mentions in here that Laconia's the percentage of poverty was 12-point-something%, and Belknap County was 8-point-something. How do we know that? There's nothing in here. I mean, if you look at the one that you're talking about, the actual living wages, which, yeah, that's a aha moment. I mean, $50,000. That's the actual living wage for. Anyway, we never see people with wages like that. But my point is, what is the median income in Belknap County? Household income, or average wages paid per. There's nothing in here that tells us that. So how do we know that there's any poverty in Belknap County? I mean, I'm not denying.
You know that, right?
Yeah.
All I can tell you is that I apologize. The information was changed from the overall overall presentation, and I think that was part of the information. So I don't want to pretend to tell you that I have information that I do not. So, because we would just be kind of speculating. So I think, maybe with the information we have and the goal maybe for today's discussion is, one, I would like to see if anybody else has an aha moment from at least the information that is in your packet, and then maybe really be able to then engage in conversation about, from your perspective and the information that was shared, what are some of the things that you think that our community can do differently, that you can do differently, other facets to this conversation that gets us past what you experienced on Friday?
For instance, the chart, the actual living wage, and I presume that those numbers in there are based on Belknap County numbers, but it doesn't say that. But let's assume for a minute that it does. I'd like to see another chart that says, okay, what are the percentages of people in those household sizes in Belknap County? What's the median wage, or how, if not that, then how many people, for instance, where you have a household with one adult and one child, what percentage of the households are below $31,000 of income?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that struck me was the actual living wage chart there on page 4 is that one adult and one child, I think across the board, just about pay considerably more in taxes than 2 adults do. And that strikes me as a bit odd and not very helpful if you're trying to get out of poverty.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I didn't even pick up that.
Pay more taxes than,
Pardon me?
you said pay 2 adults and 1 child, a household of 2 adults and 1
No,
child.
a household of one adult and one child seem to pay a lot more in taxes than 2 adults do.
But look at the income. The income was higher for that 1 adult, 1 child than 2 adults.
The income.
Well, that again raises the question, where do these numbers come from? Yeah, that seems odd too.
Where do you see the income?
Right
Well,
above the
annual
taxes.
after-tax income that's required. I don't know what that means either. I don't know what that's
Well,
required.
it says it's required.
It's required income.
It's what you need for your expenses.
Right.
It's like
Oh, in
there's
order
no
to-
child care for the 2 adults.
Right.
Or the
I
ones with
see,
children that
of
have
course.
child.
Right.
Mhm.
So
Oh, okay.
the top is the monthly expenses. And then these are when you look at the living wage chart, so that first line would mean for each of those households, that's what you would need to earn. And that's making an assumption that people are working 40 hours a week to make those monthly expenses. And in Belknap County, we know there's a lot of people who are working in very low wage jobs and are juggling 2 and 3 different jobs.
The other thing is, in the housing charts would be interesting to reflect to me if they're talking about rent or home ownership.
Which
Because
page are you on?
Same.
in the
Living
same
wage.
chart, it doesn't,
Same chart.
none of the charts talk about whether, it's rent or, if it's $8.97 a month and property taxes are running about 4, that means you would have to find a mortgage at less than $4.97 a month to fit into that bracket if you were owning a home. So I was just wondering if they were just talking about rent or
I am just going to chart down that the chart on the living wage information really is just bringing up a lot of information. There's maybe not complete information, it's a little maybe unclear, and maybe what would be most helpful now if we move into the discussion, because it's probably not that, focusing on that chart will probably not get us to the dialogue that we're hoping to get to for today. Yes, Bob?
There's one chart here that's wrong. On page 9, poverty and crime is incorrect. In the Depression days, which I experienced in the 1930s, there was a certain amount of crime, and the situations for the people were absolutely desperate. Today, they're not nearly as desperate, and we have 10 times more crime. One of the statistics is that in the 1930s, there were 270 men in the New Hampshire state prison system. These days, there's around 2,700 men in the state prison system. And that's 10 times more crime. There's lots of excuses for it. Most of them don't hold much water. So this chart is incorrect. There's no direct link between poverty and crime.
Okay, I will note it.
But that's one person's opinion.
Well, the 270 is a number,
No, I understand that, right.
and the 2,700 is a number.
Yeah.
But I think the point perhaps that you're making is the terminology direct link. I think what the statistics are showing is that the crime rate is higher in areas of poverty. That doesn't mean anything in terms of causation. You know, your example of the 1930s, in the 1930s you're saying poverty didn't cause high crime rates. I don't think this is saying anything about causality. I think it's basically saying there's a relationship there. What that relationship is, you know, maybe it implies the causation, but you know, you raised a.
No, it was a blank one.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You see my point?
Yes. I didn't fuss with you at all.
Well, what I would like to do is move this to a dialogue of talking from the perspective of what you think your community can do, and then we'll move to what we think we can do as individuals. And the question is, if you could do one thing to change poverty in your community, what would it be? So if your community at this point could do one thing to reduce poverty, what do you think that would be?
I'll start off, and this is an opinion now, I'll grant. Reduce or eliminate lying, cheating, and stealing. Lying, cheating, and stealing cause poverty.
That's 3 things.
Lying. If you want just one.
No, I'm just joking.
How do you do that?
Just ask.
Lying,
You
cheating.
start with asking.
You mean you tell people, I don't want you to lie, I don't want you to cheat, I don't want you to steal?
You start a little on up.
Isn't
The
lying,
definition
cheating,
of an
stealing
American
crime?
man is a man that tells the truth. If you're not telling the truth, you're not tuned into being an American man.
So maybe the crux of what you're saying is that there's maybe been a disintegration of values?
Tell me this again, I'm partly
So
deaf.
maybe what you're saying is there's been a breakdown of values?
Oh, an enormous breakdown. Now, the definition of American man used to be a man that could ride, shoot straight, and tell the truth.
And I thought it was a man who lived in America.
Thank you, be my guest.
Ride horses or?
Okay, ride horses implies physically coordinated, physically well coordinated. And if you look at the movies, you see the movies from around the 1930s, and the men riding a horse look like they're glued to a horse. You look at the movies today, people are going like this all the time, they're jouncing, and that's not physically coordinated.
My idea of one thing would be to increase manufacturing jobs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Manufacturing pays all bills.
Others?
Focus on stronger education.
And what does that mean?
Just doing more work with the children regarding further education. past high
Regarding
school.
what?
Regarding seeking further education past high school.
Maybe.
I would add the word higher education.
I think so too. I think you're right, Bill. But I think there's a lot of things like our district has recently passed regulations that if children are behind in their lunch money, then they're not served at school any longer, and then there's all kinds of correlations between children who are unfed, can't focus in school. So it goes a lot deeper than just higher education, but a lot more work. And
so let me see if I can say this right. Tell me if I capture it. So sometimes administrative processes or rules sometimes have an impact on a child and how well they do, because it affects sometimes the ability to eat, which affects their ability to perform.
I think it's harder for poverty-stricken children to compete in our school systems. I don't think they have the same tools at their disposal that children that come from higher income households do.
Does somebody have a good way of captioning that? Because the first comment was really that if a family's behind, then they stop receiving food.
Well, that's, one of the components is that they get far enough behind, they stop.
I'm just curious, do you find that you have families who don't qualify for the free lunches that can't pay their...
A lot, because it goes back to what we were talking about before of the poverty level. You know, if you're making $25,000, you're not getting free lunch, but there is no money for lunch either. So there's a very vast amount of people who fall right through the cracks.
So they don't qualify for free or reduced lunch, and they can't afford to pay for lunch. Okay. That's big.
The reason I mention manufacturing is that I don't care how well you're educated, if there are not jobs that pay you a decent wage, then the education is just esoteric.
Yeah, but Mendon, what came first, the chicken or the egg? I mean, today's manufacturing jobs, years ago in your 1930s and 1940s, you didn't even need a high school education. You could get hired. My father, I think he might have finished 2 years of high school, got a job at Ford Motor Company for 35 years. That's not going to happen today. I mean, the whole nature of manufacturing has changed so dramatically, over that time period. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that, you have to have the higher education, the improved education, to be able to get the manufacturing jobs. And if you don't have the manufacturing jobs, then so.
You don't have the manufacturing jobs in Belknap County, and you get educated and you move away.
And you move away. That's exactly right.
And sometimes higher education can mean tech schools,
Oh yeah,
not necessarily college.
Not everybody has to go to Harvard.
Joyce, do you have something to add?
No, but I was thinking about that manufacturing thing, because when I went to deliver for Got Lunch last time I delivered, somebody who owns the house that this family lived in said to me, if Laconia Shoe Company were still here, these people wouldn't need Got Lunch. So I agree.
I would add transportation.
That's a big one too.
And what do you mean when you say transportation?
If you don't have a job, you can't afford the car, which then you can't get a job because you don't have a car to get to the job.
Another chicken and egg.
Yeah, if you live in Guilford or Sanbornton, and you're 13 miles from the nearest location to procure a job, and you don't have a car, and there is no bus, and there is no taxi, it makes it quite difficult.
Yes, statewide, in 1975, there were 10,000 shoe manufacturing jobs in the state of New Hampshire. Today, there aren't any. It's almost the same with wood. Back in those days, I don't know if it was 10,000 or just what it was, but there was a lot of woodworking jobs, and today there are almost no woodworking jobs. Here in Laconia, we had a malleable iron company. Don't know how many people worked there, but we still need malleable iron products, but they're not being made here. We had a needle plant in Laconia, and needles are a very special kind of thing, and our needle plant's out of business. We had Allen Rogers, that was a wood products plant that was made superb wood products. They made the Easter eggs for the White House, for example, and they're out of business now. And that's what causes poverty.
I'd like to throw something else in this, but the whole jobs. You know, and I because when I was listening to you, Bob, I was sitting there thinking, well, yeah, but we lost those jobs, and we you know, international trade promotes you know, shifting of where manufacturing goes. But now we manufacture, you know, very high skilled, or the need for high skilled labor for high skilled type of jobs. But we're getting our share in New Hampshire, but they're down in the southern tier of the state. We don't get them up here. And I don't know how you want to phrase that, but you know, we seem to suffer here in the Lakes region in Belknap County in terms of that issue, the high quality jobs, the manufacturing jobs that the southern tier gets, you know, and you know, I'm sure there's a lot of reasons that we can talk about that does that, but I don't know how, what can we do here in Belknap County to get some of that shifting of that kind of work up here?
It wasn't long ago that there were 5 dairies in Guilford that produced milk for the milk market. There aren't any now. They were taxed out of operation.
Tim, from your perspective, do you?
Yeah, sure. Based on everybody's introduction, I don't think what I'm going to say is going to be very popular, but
Well, hold on, let me get the pen.
yeah. But everybody just got to remember the ground rules. So there's an old saying that a tiger hunts best when it's hungry. And if I was in charge, and there was only one thing I could do to decrease poverty, the first thing I would do is I would immediately understand that you're not going to get rid of all of it for all kinds of reasons. I have a very, very close friend of mine who's been 100% disabled since age 17 because he was riding a motorcycle one day and he had an accident, he hit his head, and he's never been the same. So I understand that there are people that absolutely need help. But what I would start to do is I would start to systematically reduce any of the free benefits that many of these people in poverty are getting. Because I believe that many, or some, because we're just trying to reduce the poverty level, that some of these people are taking a free ride. And those of us that pay taxes, and I think probably everybody in this room, because you've got a job and you came here as you're paying taxes, you're supporting these freeloaders. And so I am convinced that as we started to systematically reduce the benefits, not completely cut them off, but when they get hungry, they're going to do something. They're going to do one of two things. They're going to get a job, or they're going to move away, and that's going to reduce poverty in Belknap County. And if that's my goal, I'm going to reduce poverty in Belknap County. And I wouldn't take, and I have a philosophy about excuses. Excuses are reasons for failure, and I don't want to hear any excuses. It's never been easier than it is right now to make a fantastic living. You can actually run a business from the library, a very profitable one. I know a friend of mine who makes $1,000 a weekend going to garage sales here in Belknap County, and then he resells that stuff on eBay the following Tuesday. So I don't want to hear people say they can't make money, they can't do stuff, because it's possible. So we're going to systematically reduce, we're going to take these freeloaders off the system, and they're going to get hungry. They're actually going to, I mean, when I say hungry, I mean they're going to get hungry. And that hunger pain in their stomach's going to motivate them. Guaranteed.
Will they first turn to crime before they do the next thing?
Well, that's why I have on the end of my Glock, smile, wait for the flash. So I'm just saying I don't think that's going to happen. And if it does, that's what our police are for. I think, and then what's going to happen in Bob's case is that we'll just have more, instead of having
2,700 people in the state system. The prison system will have more. But the point is that I think we already know that what we've tried to do since the 1930s has not worked, because our poverty levels has actually increased. And if you go back in history, that's my opening statement, if you go back in time before we had all of these entitlement programs, there was a poverty problem in this nation, but it was very tiny. And the private sector took care of it. And the private sector can do a great job of taking care of this poverty program, but it's been taken out of their hands. And I think that's what I would do.
There's a difference, though, between charity care and the ability to earn a living. And that's why I keep coming back to, you've got to have jobs.
My thought process in the fact that people would be hungry enough to go and find work, I can certainly understand what you're saying in that statement, but I think a large part of the problem is the work it isn't here to be had.
But it is. I disagree with you. I'm an internet entrepreneur myself. I've been self-employed my entire life. And I'm here. Did you know that you could open up a store online right now that would have 10,000 items in your shopping cart for 80 cents a day? Did you know?
Yeah, but people need to be educated about that type of stuff. There's a lot of people that have no clue even how to turn on a computer.
In Sanbornton, 75% of the population don't even have the internet because cable is not available.
But like I said, you can get that at the library. You can actually run this. You can run this up.
If you live 14 miles from the library and you don't have a car, what's the solution?
A bicycle. I mean, I used to ride my bike. I'm just trying to tell you that I think people have gotten out of touch of what it was like. In other words, you don't have to have a car. There are millions of people in this world that don't have cars.
I think there are certain people that do get used to living off the system. But I think there's also people out there that bust their butt every single day and just need that little bit of extra boost to get them through for a little while, and then they're good. Those are the type of people that the system is good for.
But there's a lot on that system that we're seeing generational.
Right, absolutely. We're in the fourth generation.
It's become the way of life. They
Right.
know no differently.
Right,
And
but that's
because it's out there, they feel
that's a whole
they're
nother.
right.
There's a whole nother discussion of why that is. And if you read the book "Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion" by Robert Cialdini, you'll quickly understand that the politicians, they don't want these people to get out of poverty, because by giving them, just like tonight. So the dinner that was given to us, that's reciprocity. In other words, that food, if you made the mistake and ate food here tonight, they pushed a psychological trigger here. I'm serious. Everybody I'm sure needs to read this book. It'll change the way you look at everything in life. It's called Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion. But the point being is that the politicians, they give you food stamps, they give you welfare, they give you all these things, and subconsciously the only thing the person who's getting it can give back is one thing, and that is their vote. I'm just telling you, you can research this and it'll blow your mind. This is really the bottom of it. This is why this problem is so hard to solve, just so you know.
So what I wish we had the more robust data,
Right.
because I think what you would have seen would have been the changes over the last few years in the demand or need for food stamps, and it is really a different face to food stamps, and it's a direct correlation to the loss of jobs and the wages that were once in this area. So without that, but I think those of you who work in that arena probably can talk a little bit about that. And when we look at the growing trends of the jobs versus the information that connects people to other types of jobs that maybe people aren't aware of, there's a disconnect to what you see and know and what's available that gets you to that wage that people are trying to sustain their families.
Well, then that brings to the point of this room we're sitting in. Are you? This is a rhetorical question. Are you saying that these multi-million-dollar buildings and these facilities and these school systems, they're not doing their job? In other words, are they not? Why can't these kids figure out the internet? Why
It's a
can't?
good question. Why can't they?
Why don't? This is all rhetorical questions. Why don't they know how to do all this? Why aren't there classes here at Laconia Middle School teaching about entrepreneurism? Well, you know, I could go on and on and on and on. So I would venture to say that if you investigated that, that you might come to a conclusion that maybe the schools don't want these kids to learn too much. I mean, they want to learn something, but
We have to be cautious not to pigeonhole the face of poverty. You know, they're not all people who aren't working. A lot of them are working. And a lot of them are people who have worked their whole life who have suddenly lost $60,000, $60,000 jobs. And I mean, some of them, they're not taking classes in middle school because they're 62 years old and have lost all of their pension and all. So I think we have to be cautious not to assume that poverty are people sitting at home on their sofa who don't want to work.
No, remember,
Right.
remember what I said at the beginning. In other words, I already know we're not going to get rid of all of it, and I know that there are people that absolutely need help. The goal of the whole program, or why we're all gathered here today, is to reduce poverty. And if you want to reduce poverty, it's simple. We're going to get rid of the freeloaders, and we're going to do that by turning off the faucet on them until it's painful. And they'll do one of two things. They're either going to go out and get a job, a better paying. They're going to do something to support what they need.
Maybe.
Or they'll be in a tent somewhere on the railroad tracks and living in poverty.
And how do you differentiate whether you're turning the faucet off for a disabled veteran and his family, or a 22-year-old who is just learned to live off the system and is trying to do that?
I think that's really pretty simple, because I think if you go into a situation, if you hire professionals who really truly evaluate these people, I mean, just like in my situation, if I was in charge, and this is a very radical approach, but if you wanted to get a welfare check, you would get physically evaluated, and if you wanted to get your check and they would test you, you would actually fill buckets of rock each day and just carry them from one end of the parking lot to the other. And pretty soon someone would say, "This is stupid, I don't like doing this." Well, then don't do it. Go do something else. Go get a job or whatever. It's a very crazy approach. But to answer your question, you would have to evaluate these people. In other words, just like I said, there are people like my friend who absolutely can't hold a job. That motorcycle accident caused him to have severe short-term ADD. I mean, he can't hold attention on a topic for more than 20 seconds. So he's unemployable. I get that. There are people that absolutely need help. I get that. I'm compassionate to those people. I'm just saying, if our goal is to reduce poverty, there's ways to do it.
But the reason that we have more than an 8% unemployment rate in this country is not because all of those 8%, whatever number that is, don't want a job. They're not hiring. You ask, employers are not hiring.
Sure, I'm one of them. I'm not hiring right now. I'm waiting until November. I've already told people that work for me now, if we don't change our leadership this November, you're probably going to lose your job. I mean, that's what's going on in the mind. If you talk to a bunch of entrepreneurs and small business people, that's what you're going to find.
I've seen the statistics too, and they're not hiring because nobody is buying their products or buying their services.
Well, that's not true.
That is absolutely.
So we're kind of going off the rails.
Yeah, that's all right.
Bill, I was wondering if we can go back to what you said when we first started this conversation, and you were hoping that our discussion could get to a place that Friday's event didn't get to. And I'm wondering if there's
we are. I think Bob will agree too. I mean, we're talking about, we're all taking different ideas, but at least we're talking about how do we impact on the reduction of poverty. I mean, we may not agree among ourselves as that. Unfortunately, the meeting. Well, Tana, you were there too. The meeting there talked about, what are the problems for the various agencies and. Do we have any churches? Well, Salvation Army.
New Hampshire Catholic Charities.
Okay. We were talking about the symptoms and how to deal with the symptoms.
We also did hear about morals and values and
but
higher ed, and there was a few things that ended up being discussed. Jobs, manufacturing.
Eventually, but that was only because he threw it at the table.
It took a little while. to get there.
Well, it's a good process check to make sure that we're actually getting
Yeah,
to the heart of what we need to talk about. Go ahead.
I'd like to enter a disclaimer.
Okay.
Tim is very interesting in what he says. He blamed politicians for a lot of that, and I'm a politician, and I disagree that I've done those things.
I eat the pizza. What are you trying to tell me?
It's okay.
I forgot to put in an adjective, so.
I feel good that I didn't eat the pizza.
Interesting. I think just an interesting fact, I think, for those who have been around a while. Tim is very fortunate to actually be an entrepreneur, an internet-based business, because there were some forefathers who thought about economic development and the infrastructure for the internet and what needed to occur here in order to thrive and support businesses like yours, because there was this knowing that something was changing. And at the time, I believe it was Eliza Leadbeater with the Belknap County Economic Development Center had her eyes on this is one way that some businesses would be able to operate and survive and bring opportunity into the region. So we have about 45 minutes, so I'm thinking that it might, unless there's something more that people want to talk about what their community can do, we can segue into what can we do as individuals.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all of that.
So we've talked a lot about what we can do, one thing we can do as a community. I thought maybe now we can segue into what's one thing we can do as individuals to reduce poverty.
Okay. One of the things I read here in the blurb that came out for this meeting is 20% by 2020. And so there's a lot of things we can do in the next 8 years.
20% what? Reduction of poverty?
Correct.
Yeah,
yes.
that's the goal, that's the United Way goal.
So what do you think, Bob? Do you want to start us off?
Our nation has lost probably 42,000 factories that we shipped overseas using U.S. tax money to pay for the shipments. And we have to stop that.
So in a personal way, how would you do that?
We talk about ourselves, and you want the answer from all of us, as you, Bob, as an individual, or
Okay, what I am doing, I'm working to put an end to that, and you have to realize that this was established in the days when the House of Representatives impeached Bill Clinton. They had this information that was sufficient to justify them voting against Bill Clinton at that time. And this is that the factories being shipped overseas with U.S. dollars, the countries overseas spend some of the money they get, not only to buy the factory, but to send some back to pay for their re-election. And the initial part, Bill Clinton was charged with being bribed by China. And there was sufficient evidence that he was accepting bribes in his election campaign. So unfortunately, a certain number of senators were in that also, and getting money from China and countries all around the world. As a result, Americans are into poverty now.
So, Bob, if I captured it correctly, I've got support efforts to stop overseas transfer of business operations, and you would personally do that through local communities getting involved in elections.
And doing what I could to educate the public. Would you believe that the agency that's facilitating most of those overseas movements of our factory is the United Nations?
Absolutely.
How about buy American-made products, Bob?
That's a start.
Could do that. I've been focusing on that since I saw it on Good Morning America.
Thank you.
And buy stain silver, made with American-made ingredients too.
The one thing I think we can.
If we have to go back to the chart over there, don't worry.
The one thing that I can do is to advocate for revision of our tax system, improvement of our tax system, getting rid of the loopholes and the stashing money overseas and all that kind of stuff. I'm at a loss for the right terminology for some reason or other at the moment, but
And how would you do that?
by my voting.
Yes, the truly rich people pay very little in income taxes. When Nelson Rockefeller was appointed vice president, the Senate required him to release his previous 10 years of income tax returns. And in those 10 years, Nelson Rockefeller paid no taxes at all in 8 of those years and $600 in each of the other 2 years. Believe, I wasn't much of an earner in those days, but I was paying more than the $600 a year.
When you first started your comments, so I thought you were addressing to Mendon and anointing him as really one of the truly rich people.
I was hoping.
I wasn't going to say that.
You had a comment, Tim?
Yeah, I think if you want to reduce poverty here in Belknap County, everybody can, I've had one since the day it opened up, but open up a YouTube channel, get out your video camera, and start sharing your knowledge. Because everybody in this room is an expert at something. And there's a really good chance that some of that knowledge that you're going to share will help those in poverty either A, better themselves or improve their skills, or B, it'll help them save some money. And I do that each week. I mean, I upload quite a few DIY videos, and if they just go to the library, watch the video, they can fix their sink themselves instead of having to pay $80 to a plumber. So everybody in this room has got skills, and you should be sharing them.
And how do I find you? I don't understand how to use that. How would I, as a person, find out that you have that YouTube?
But it doesn't. You might not find my video about like patching drywall.
You mean if I Google, I need help with fixing my sink?
Fix faucet, fix.
And it would be it would bring me to YouTube instead of Wikipedia?
Yes.
Sometimes it does.
Well, yeah, to answer your question, first of all, a lot of people don't realize that YouTube is the #2 search engine in the world. #2 search engine in the world, meaning people just go to YouTube. They don't even go to Google. You just go to, like for example, I was out of town. You'll love this. I was out of town on a business trip, and a button popped off. I did have a sewing kit. What a dumbass man I am. Sorry women, but I don't know how to sew a dumb button on. Well, you know what? I knew how to sew a button after about 90 seconds. I went and got a video, and I'll be doggone. Some woman on YouTube showed me how to sew a button on. I was like blown away. All right, so that to answer your questions, I do. Like, you may want to know how to make angel food cake. How to replace it exactly? You would just type in how to fix kitchen sink. Bingo. It's so that's. But everybody in this room who's sitting here, each one of us has a skill. We're very good at something, or it could just be a life experience, something about saving money. And you've got in your phone. We'll get to him in just a minute. He can wait.
Oh, no.
He can wait. So just, how many people have phones like that that got a video capability?
No.
Well, then you can, the library's got video cameras you can use for free. I know that for a fact.
I just had a comment that, if I'm watching a video and fixing my sink myself, then my plumber is going to be in one of the poverty categories.
No, he won't. I guarantee you that. I'm a master plumber, and I know what we charge an hour, so he will not be in poverty. Don't even worry about that for a minute.
An individual thing that I could do to help poverty is become involved in the school systems and mentor and tutor children to help support them, because they're the next generation. We have to focus on the next generation.
When you're talking about mentoring and supporting, the children, I'm also thinking about mentoring and supporting the adults and the parents, and sharing, some of the knowledge and the skills and the tools.
There is some thought process to the fact that sometimes you can't fully bring back the generation already entrenched. But you can, sort of start dealing with those issues at a much younger age. Not that you can't make a difference, because you certainly can. But I notice a lot of the children in the community just don't have the support at home. Their parents are already addicted, maybe already, involved in some difficult issues, and exposure to adults who have made different choices can be big.
I would add with the American-made products that supporting local businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a really good one.
Absolutely. Just did it.
Spend your money where you make it.
Yep, I just did it. Just put a big T-shirt order in with that Peaches, what Peaches is right down there at Mosquito Bridge. Just, I got a much cheaper price out of state, but you know what? Decided to give the business to them.
Given you mentioned Liza Ledbetter's name a little bit earlier, and given the fact that my former fellow Rotarian is now sitting behind us over there observing, I would be remiss if I didn't bring back and get in that list the Belknap County Economic Development Council. I've been an incorporator for many years, which unfortunately for a number of those years it means I get to go to a nice soup dinner and really not too much beyond that. And I plan to to give Carmen a call. She's the executive director over there now, and see what more I can do for that organization, because I think that is one of the most important, in terms of this subject anyway, is one of the most, maybe the most important organization in Belknap County.
Hold on, let me just get a new paper. You may need to Sarah, did you have something that you want to add to the list?
Well, I was kind of going off on the mentoring the children in school and the parenting support groups, teaching budgeting. I think would be a huge help to a lot of people.
And what are some ways that can happen?
There's just maybe a gathering of people who have good experience in budgeting, do it well, have either been way down and brought themselves back up because of strict budgeting. There's all kinds of things I've seen all over the internet of, there's eons of like the budgeting mom sites and whatnots, but just share that information to people and bring it as a reality instead of just ideas on the internet. Show them, and maybe just people volunteering to teach and share that knowledge through, free classes of some sort.
There's a church downtown Laconia, Evangelical Baptist Church, as a matter of fact. I think is looking for people, the teaching budgeting aspect of that, working with people where in many cases, people, their lack of budgeting skills leads to a lot of the problems that they face. So I just offer that to you as that's one. And I also think St. Andre is doing some of that.
I think they are. I think the Catholic Charity System.
Yeah.
I went to a budgeting workshop through the UNH Cooperative Extension about a week or so ago with Sue Cagle, she was the one that facilitated it. And one of the things that she brought to our attention was about setting goals, and that prioritizes the budgeting piece. Is, what is an important goal for you? What is an important goal for you and your family? How are you going to get there? And then maybe putting it on the refrigerator and having it in your wallet. So every time you open your wallet, you see a picture of, oh, it's a house. A house is my goal. Or whatever that goal may be for, the individual family, so goal setting can go along with the budgeting piece.
But I've seen where it also helps people understand necessity versus wants. And that there is a difference. That when you're in certain situations, this is what you have to survive. These other things, you don't really have to. So I think, as we've come along through the different generations, there was a lot of, not to pinpoint any one, but the me generation and all the extras everybody thinks they have to have, and that's part of living. It's kind of skewed some of the generations following.
Any additional thoughts?
The other thing that is happening here in town that I've been involved with, one is getting that mentoring into this middle school, which I've been involved with. But you've got that 6 different ways up there. The other thing is that REACH program that's taking parents of children 0 to 5 to teach the parents how to teach their children and how to play with their children in a way that gets them ready for kindergarten. And that's a great start, I think, for the kids.
So it's program.
I think it's called REACH.
Oh, Ready. It's called Ready.
Ready. I was ready. Yeah, ready. Ready for kindergarten. Yeah.
It's teaching and modeling. Other thoughts? Now, some of what you folks have raised has really kind of overlapped into the section of community as well, because you have raised examples of what the community currently does. And I'm wondering if we can kind of expound on that a little bit more about when we think about the community, not just thinking about churches and nonprofits, but even from employers' perspectives. What might employers, aside from the one we charted well about offering high-paying or better-paying jobs, or the availability of jobs, what might some things that employers can do?
On-site daycare.
On-site daycare.
Pardon me?
On-site daycare.
Flex time.
Health insurance.
Continuing education.
Internships for students to learn about different businesses in the community.
That could be very helpful.
I was listening in the car today to NPR, and they were talking about to a man who was the principal, or I guess the principal of a school somewhere else. But it was a school where 95% of the children were free and reduced lunches, and it was a very, very poor community that was mostly Black and Hispanic. And they've gone to a system where the kids have 50 days of summer is spent at school. And those 50 days are spent sort of this internship. It was alternate kinds of education, but it made a huge, huge difference in their community.
So, and do you raise it as that maybe that's something that employers can help support in their community?
I guess I'm saying summer school programs, which we kind of have here. The middle school has it, and I guess Elm Street has it too, in a way.
I think the elementary
I think all the
schools have
elementary
Project
schools.
Extra,
Yeah.
and then the middle school here they're probably run through Project Expert, like there are different programs they can.
I don't know if
There's
this
also Title
is
I.
the same as your internships for students, but what's going on here very effectively is marrying together directly the schools with the employers, where the kids that are taking shop, for instance, in school, are working with operations that mechanics that hire mechanics, so that they go to school for half the day and then they work for half of the day.
Cool. You can put down virtual employees. That'll help reduce poverty. They don't have to drive. They can just work from home.
Well, the Hewitt Technical Center at the high school does that type of thing.
Yes.